The old gym was drowning in debt. A mysterious stranger in a weathered baseball cap appeared among the rusty equipment, leaving behind riddles. A $500 check, child-sized boxing gloves, midnight trucks hauling gear. Beneath the facade of an ordinary patron hid Dwayne Johnson, whose decision to save the gym ignited social media. Veterans, teens, single moms. Here, everyone found the strength to start over. But the story doesn't end. Secret packages, stones etched with messages, a girl at the door with clenched fists and hope. Discover how one act of kindness became a wave, changing lives. Subscribe. The best is yet to come. The town of Springvale breathes steel. Its streets, once paved with the pride of factory workers, now snaked between abandoned workshops like scars on the body of a giant frozen mid-breath. On the corner of Fifth Avenue, tucked between the rusted gates of an old factory and a weed-choked lot, stood a building locals called the Fortress. Its bricks, once crimson like blood-swollen muscles, had long dulled under layers of soot and rain. The crooked sign read Iron Haven Gym, the G knocked off by a hurricane in the 90s, never repaired. Inside, the air smelled of sweat, metal, and dust, a scent Mike knew better than his own reflection. He cracked the shutters, letting a sliver of dawn light slip in. It glided over rows of dumbbells, frozen on racks like soldiers after a parade. Rust stains mapped the terrain Mike had studied for 30 years. The crack in a barbell's grip left by Joe the Hammer during his 2003 record attempt. Floor scratches from the chair where Sarah, the county's only female powerlifter, once nursed her baby between sets. Now Joe lay under marble. Sarah had moved to Nevada, and the machines, like old dogs, waited for masters who never returned. Mike ran his palm over a bench press. The cold vinyl, once bright blue, now resembled stormy skies. He pulled a flannel rag from his pocket and scrubbed the lat pull-down's handle. Rust flaked reluctantly, staining the cloth orange. Like blood from cuts, he thought, remembering painting these machines a decade ago with his late father. The man used to say gyms were modern churches, where people prayed with their bodies, repented weaknesses, sought salvation from lives heavier than any weight plate. But this church had lost its flock. Under a cracked mirror lay a stack of unpaid bills. Rent, electricity, taxes, totaling $17,430. That's what 6 more months would cost. Mike drifted to the rack of kids' boxing gloves, pink and blue, bought for free classes for shelter children. Now they hung like fallen leaves, gathering dust. Morning unfolded. Mike replaced a frayed cable on the lat machine with a vacuum part. The mechanism groaned like a sick man agreeing to one last try. At 7 a.m., the door creaked. Mrs. Clark shuffled in, a widow with trembling hands who'd come daily for 2 years to remember how to walk. Her routine: 10 minutes on the bike, 2 sets on the elliptical. Today, she left homemade cookies instead of cash. Mike nodded, stashing them under the counter next to Farmer Tom's eggs, Teacher Linda's poetry book, and sneakers from a guy with iron or die tattooed on his neck. By noon, sunlight pierced dirty windows, pooling on the floor like liquid gold. Mike crouched to check the weight-stack bolts and found a stuffed bear in a tiny bandana under the bench, a relic from days when the gym buzzed with kids. He dusted off cobwebs and sat on the front desk. Maybe someone will claim it, he thought, though he knew parents now drove their kids to a shiny new fitness center with hydro massage rooms and smoothie bars. At dusk, shadows stretched longer than promises. Mike hammered loose floorboards, each strike echoing in his skull like the town demanding answers. He remembered the bank manager, a former client, suggesting he sell the iron for scrap. Mike had left, bought paint, and spent the night restriping the treadmill. The neon green lines still glared, his last rebellion against the gray. Before closing, he paused at the photo wall. Yellowed images shouted through time. The 1999 arm wrestling team, vets rehabbing after Iraq, his 20-year-old self with dad hoisting a homemade kettlebell. A newspaper clipping read, Iron Haven saves teen from gang life. The story of Mike bailing out a kid who'd stolen a dumbbell. That kid was now studying to be a trainer in Columbus. Mike killed the lights, leaving only the entryway bulb. Its haze lit a poster he'd hung the night before. Strength isn't about how much you lift. It's about how many times you're willing to get back up. His father's words. The door slammed, but the gym refused silence. Creaking hinges hummed with the fridge's growl, wind whistling through cracks, clocks ticking down final days. Somewhere in the dark, between shadows, an ember glowed, tiny, stubborn, like rust that won't scrub away. Dawn in Springvale hung foggy, like an unspoken thought. Moisture trembled in the air, beating on Iron Haven's windows like the building's tears. Mike arrived before the roosters crowed, determined to fix the elliptical. Its squeals sounded like a soul trapped mid-workout. Removing the panel, he found a mouse nest, 5 pink, blind pups. Tough luck for you two, he muttered, relocating them to a protein powder box. The mice joined Mrs. Clark's cookies under the counter. The first patron arrived late. Rain had turned streets to mud rivers. A man in a black cap, pulled low to shadow his beard, filled the doorway. His frame resembled a rough-hewn cliff, broad back, arms forever coiled to grip a barbell. Yet he moved softly, like a boxer tiptoeing toward his opponent. Mike nodded, tightening bolts. The stranger gravitated to the dumbbells, his gaze lingering on rusted plates and the mirror's crack, as if searching for ghosts. He grabbed 20-pounders and began curls. Each rep was poetry. No rush, just muscle and iron and rhythm. Half an hour later, Mike approached with a towel and homemade cleaner. Handles slippery. The stranger shook his head, but handed over the weights. As Mike wiped them down, the man removed his cap. Light caught his face, square jaw, scar above the brow, a profile known to millions. But Mike, dusting the dumbbells, didn't look up. The stranger's workout turned into a spectacle without an audience. He moved from one machine to the next, as if testing their durability. Bench press with rusty plates, their paint chipping off in star-like patterns. Lat pull down with a cable that sang a mournful tune. Squats with a barbell, its bar bending like an old man's tired back. After each set, his eyes wandered across the walls, over the veterans' photos, the kids' boxing gloves, and the poster with a quote from Father Mike. At noon, as the rain intensified, the gym filled with a hum, like breathing. The stranger approached a corner where a punching bag once hung. Now a worn-out sack stuffed with rags and sawdust swayed there. His punches were not loud, but rhythmic. Not the fury of a beginner, nor the showmanship of a professional, but something in between, as if he was conversing with the bag in a forgotten language. Mike, fixing a treadmill, watched him stealthily. He liked how the stranger touched the equipment, not like an enemy, but like an old friend. When the man finished, Mike gestured toward the water cooler, adorned with a sticker reading, "Thanks for not drinking our rust." The man filled a paper cup, his gaze falling on a box with baby mice. "Pest problems?" he asked, his voice low and warm, like a sun-heated stone, filling the space between the shelves. Mike smirked, wiping his hands on his apron. "Neighbors. Decided my gym is a branch of Noah's Arkansas." He told them about the bat in the ventilation, the stray cat that stole gloves, and the raccoon that wreaked havoc in the locker room. The stranger listened, adjusting his cap, when his eyes caught sight of children's boxing medals on a shelf. Cheap plastic stars labeled Iron Haven Junior Champions. "Yours?" He nodded at the awards. Mike rubbed his forehead, leaving a black smudge of machine oil. Free section for those with nowhere else to go. Closed it last month. There was no self-pity in his voice, only facts laid out like weights on a bar. The stranger slowly walked around the gym, his fingers tracing the dusty machines as if reading their history through the scars. He stopped at the wall with photos, lingering on a picture of a teenager with a kettlebell, the same one who once stole the equipment and was now training to be a coach. Before leaving, The man took out a worn notebook from his bag, wrote something on a page with a film company logo, tore it out, and handed it to Mike. "For the mice," he said, pointing to the amount of $500. Mike froze, the paper trembling in his fingers like an autumn leaf. We don't accept," he began, but the stranger had already put on his cap, hiding his gaze. "It's not for you." "For them." He nodded at the box where the mice squeaked as if arguing about something. The door closed behind him, leaving the scent of expensive cologne mixed with old wood. Mike rolled up the check and put in a tip jar containing $3 and some change. He turned back to the machines when he noticed a black leather glove on the floor. Picking it up, he saw the initials DJ and a stain resembling lipstick. "Strange," he muttered, hanging the glove next to the kids. Maybe the owner would return. Maybe not. That evening, as Mike closed the gym, he found the mice gone. The box was empty, with only a candy wrapper at the bottom, perhaps a gift from the mysterious benefactor. He turned off the lights, and in the darkness, the echo of the stranger's steps lingered among the rows of machines like a promise not yet fulfilled. Shadows gathered earlier in Iron Haven than outside. The autumn sun, as if ashamed of its weakness, hid behind the clouds by 3 p.m. Mike sat on the floor, taping a torn belt on the lap pull-down machine. The old, sticky tape refused to hold, slipping like hope. From speakers mounted in the corners of the gym since the 90s, Elvis's melody, "Can't Help Falling in Love," softly played. The record was once a gift from Sarah, who said, "Love for iron should also sound beautiful." Now the needle skipped on the words, "Wise men say," repeating the wisdom Mike so desperately needed. The door opened silently, as if pushed by the wind. The stranger in the black cap entered, shaking off raindrops from his shoulders, resembling silver pins. Today, he chose the corner with the punching bag. His strikes, unlike last time, were sharper, as if he was hammering fleeting thoughts into the fabric. Mike, finished with the belt, watched him stealthily. In the rhythm of the man's movements, there was a discipline found only in those who had once lost everything and rebuilt themselves. They didn't speak. Only the sound of gloves hitting the bag and the squeak of duct tape filled the space. When a stranger stopped, wiping his face with a towel, Mike nodded toward the cooler. The water, as always, smelled of metal. The man filled a cup, then suddenly approached the counter with the kid's gloves. His fingers touched a pink strap, the same one that once belonged to a girl who moved to a foster family in Denver. "They won't come back?" he asked, his voice slightly louder this time, as if breaking through a wall of silence. Mike shrugged, wiping the squat rack with a rag. "Kids need mirrors, digital counters. Not this." He gestured toward the cracked walls, but there was no resentment in his gesture, only tired acceptance. The stranger took off his cap, fully revealing his face for the first time. A scar above his eyebrow seemed to pulse in the lamplight. He approached the treadmill, which Mike had once painted a toxic green. The machine's belt was torn in the middle, exposing springs that looked like skeletal ribs. The man pressed the start button. The motor coughed, jerked, and fell silent. Like a heart after a heart attack, Mike muttered, approaching with a wrench. He began unscrewing the panel, explaining how he replaced gears with coffee lids and resoldered wires with a lighter. The stranger listened, arms crossed, and suddenly pointed to a burnt-out capacitor. "Here," he said, "dead zone." His fingers, massive yet surprisingly gentle, touched the circuit board as if diagnosing an illness. Mike chuckled. "Yeah, I figured that out years ago. But new parts." He didn't finish, pulling a crumpled rent bill from his pocket. The figure 17,430 was now crossed out in red. The new figure was 19,620. The bank had added a late fee. The stranger glanced at the paper, his eyebrow twitching, but he said nothing. Instead, he took a white box tied with twine from his bag. "For the bag," he explained, pointing to a hole in the worn fabric. Inside were pounds of fresh sawdust, smelling of pine. They worked silently, like two mechanics on a wrecked ship. The stranger held the bag while Mike stitched the hole with nylon thread. Then, together, they filled it with sawdust mixed with rags from an old t-shirt with the gym's logo. When the bag was in place, the man struck it with a test punch. The sound was muffled, earthy, as if a heartbeat had returned to someone long dead. Before leaving, the stranger stopped at the wall with photos. His attention was drawn to an image of Mike and his father, two generations holding a kettlebell cast in their garage. "Did he teach you not to give up?" he asked, and in his question, there was something personal, as if he was asking himself. Mike exhaled, adjusting the frame. "He taught me that rust isn't the end. It's just the story iron tells the world." The rain outside turned into a downpour as the stranger headed for the exit. At the door, he turned around, his gaze falling on the tip jar with the rolled-up $500 check. "The mice escaped," Mike said, trying to joke, but his voice wavered. The man nodded, adjusting his cap, and for a moment, his lips twitched in a semblance of a smile. "Escape isn't always defeat. Sometimes it's preparation for a leap," he said, disappearing through the door. Mike was left alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the new bag. He approached the counter where, next to the pink boxing glove, hung a black one with the initials DJ. Suddenly, he noticed another glove on the floor under the bench press, its pair. Picking it up, he found a note inside, written on a scrap of a script. "Broken machines are the best teachers. They make you find strength not in iron, but in yourself. DJ." The paper smelled of oak and something else. Expensive, foreign, unattainable. Mike folded the note in half and tucked it into his wallet next to his father's photo. That night, as he closed the gym, he left the entrance light on. An orange beam pierced through the storm like a signal someone might be searching for. Outside, in a black SUV parked around the corner, the stranger pulled out his phone. On the screen was a document. Project Rebirth, Budget and Supply Plan. He looked at the photo in his wallet. A young woman with a child, taken in a studio that smelled of mold and hope. "It's time," he whispered, starting the engine. The car disappeared into the rain, carrying away a promise that had already begun to sprout through the cracks in the asphalt. The night before dawn was the quietest in a long time. Springvale, usually sleeping under the snore of trains and the howl of stray dogs, seemed to hold its breath. The night light in Iron Haven was not on. Mike had forgotten to turn it on for the first time in 10 years. Instead, he sat on a box of protein powder, staring at the $500 check. The paper, crumpled in his fingers, felt alien, like a ticket to another world. He hadn't dared to cash it, as if afraid the money would vanish along with the stranger's secret. 30 miles from town, an abandoned warehouse, spotlights were on. Dwayne Johnson stood among rows of brand-new gym equipment, their chrome handles gleaming like blades under the moon. He ran his hand over the surface of a treadmill, feeling the cold of the polished metal. Too perfect, he thought, remembering Mike's creaky elliptical with a nest of mice. In a corner of the warehouse, workers loaded equipment into trucks, their voices echoing under the vaults like prayers in an empty cathedral. He pulled out a worn photo from his pocket, the same one he kept in his wallet. It showed his young mother standing in front of Jim in Honolulu. The Stronghold Gym sign hung crookedly, and the window glass was broken. It was a year before she pawned her family earrings to buy him his first pair of boxing gloves. "You must give people not what they want, but what they need, even if they don't see it," she would say. The trucks set off, their headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Dwayne followed in his SUV, its windows tinted darker than his past. The radio played an Elvis song, the same one that skipped in Mike's gym. He smiled, imagining how the old record would soon play over the creak of new cables. In Iron Haven, Mike dozed off on the bench press, his sleep restless. He dreamed of his father painting stripes on the treadmill, mice escaping from a box, and black gloves growing from the walls like ivy. He woke up from the cold, The gym door was ajar. On the threshold lay a box labeled for the bag. Inside, among the sawdust, he found a key to the warehouse and a map marked 30 miles from town. On the back was written, "Stories need room to breathe." DG. Don found him on the highway. Mike drove an old delivery van his father had bought in the 90s. The engine coughed, and the headlights flickered like a winking drunk. He didn't know why he was going. Maybe because of the key, maybe because for the first time in years, he felt someone else believed in his fortress. The warehouse was empty. Wind whistled through rusty beams, tearing insulation from the ceiling. Mike stood among the shadows, the key uselessly dangling in his hand. Suddenly, he noticed tracks, fresh tire marks on the dusty floor, scraps of packaging film smelling of pine. His heart raced. He ran to the van, not noticing as the key fell from his hand and disappeared in the grass. The return trip was torture. Every mile, Mike scanned the horizon, expecting to see an answer. But around him were only fields stretching to the sky like green waves. Suddenly, his van stalled. He got out, kicked the tire, and sat on a roadside. In his pocket, he found DJ's note. Strength isn't avoiding breakdowns. Strength is fixing them along the way. Mike smirked, grabbed a wrench, and dove under the hood. Meanwhile, the trucks were already approaching Springvale. Dwayne stopped the convoy on the outskirts, waiting for darkness. He stepped out, inhaling the air smelling of rain and coal. In the distance, he saw the Iron Haven sign, its tilted letter G, now seeming to him a symbol of something greater. Not gym, but guts. Determination. Mike returned to the gym an hour before sunset. He didn't notice the trucks driving by, the man in the cap talking to the drivers, or the envelope with the film company logo pinned to the gym door. Inside, he found another box, this time with new cables and gears. And a letter, "Rust is strong, but people are stronger." DG. He sat on the floor, laying out the parts before him. For the first time in years, his hands trembled not from fatigue, but from something he hesitated to call hope. Outside, the sunset painted the sky in the colors of an old kettlebell: orange, crimson, black. That night, as the town sank into silence again, shadows of trucks stood still on the lot behind Iron Haven. Dwayne stood among them, looking at the dim light in the gym window. He remembered how, 20 years ago, he had slept in a gym because he couldn't afford to rent an apartment. Back then, someone anonymously left him a check for $1,000. "The circle is complete," he whispered, clutching the warehouse key he had picked up from the grass earlier. The drivers began unloading equipment wrapped in black plastic. The clang of metal was muffled, as if the town itself feared waking Mike. Dwayne took the first box, children's boxing gloves, pink and blue, just like the ones gathering dust on the shelf in Iron Haven. He placed them by the door, next to a pot of snowdrops, the first flowers to push through the cracks in the asphalt. Before dawn, he left, leaving two things: a new treadmill installed in place of the old one, and a letter in an envelope with money to settle the debt. It contained only 3 words: "Now it's your turn." Mike, waking up at dawn to a strange hum, stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of iron and pine. He didn't yet know that around the corner waited a truck with gym equipment, that his bank account was cleared, that children from the shelter were already on their way to him with new medals. He simply stood there, breathing in the morning, and for the first time in many years, felt the rust inside him beginning to flake away. The morning began with a silence too thick for Springvale. Even the crows, usually cawing on the roof of Iron Haven, sat quietly on the wires as if spellbound. Mike woke up on the gym floor, his back aching from a night spent under the van's hood. He reached for a mug of cold coffee, but his hand froze in midair. The gym door was ajar, and an unnaturally bright light streamed through the gap. On the threshold lay a snowdrop in a pot. The white bud, pushing through a crack in the concrete, swayed in the wind as if beckoning him to follow. Mike stepped out, and the world turned upside down. Trucks. There were 5, lined up along the street like steel giants frozen in a bow. Gym equipment, wrapped in black plastic, gleamed under the first rays of the sun like treasure chests. Nearby stood boxes with company logos he had only seen in magazines. But what struck him most was not this. On the asphalt, someone had drawn arrows in chalk, yellow, like the ones he used to draw on the gym floor for the kids. They led to the door, to his feet, to the new treadmill already installed in place of the old one. Mike stepped forward, and the plastic on the nearest machine rustled like the wing of a giant bat. He tore it off. Chrome handles, digital displays, soft seats the color of the sea. Everything smelled new, like a car fresh from the showroom. His fingers trembled as he touched the start button. The motor hummed, not with the creak of worn gears, but with a steady, confident purr that vibrated the floor. He didn't hear the SUV pull up. He didn't notice the man in the black cap, push back on his head, step out of it. Dwayne stood watching as Mike circled the trucks, like a kid on Christmas morning. His gaze slid over the cracks in the gym walls, the rusty dumbbells stacked in the corner, and the photos of veterans who now looked at the new equipment as if seeing the future. The first scream came from the gas station. Mrs. Clark, on her way to buy milk, dropped her bag. Eggs broke, forming yellow puddles, but she didn't look at them. "Mike," she screamed. This is..." Her hand tremors suddenly vanished as she pointed at Dwayne. People poured out of their homes like ants from a disturbed nest. Teenagers with phones, farmers in greasy overalls, children dragging their parents by the hand. They surrounded the trucks, snapping photos, but no one dared to approach. Dwayne took off his cap. Silence felt like a weight. Even the wind paused, catching on the Iron Haven sign. Mike turned around. Their eyes met. The gym owner, smelling of machine oil and desperation, and a mountain of a man whose face every kid in America knew. No one spoke. Dwayne stepped forward, his shadow enveloping Mike. But instead of fear, Mike felt a strange relief, as if a 200-pound weight had been lifted off him. He held out his hand. In his palm lay the black glove with the initials DJ, found a week ago. Dwayne took it, nodded, then pulled out the second one from his pocket, the one lost on the bench. They stood still, like two boxers about to shake hands after a match. Suddenly, Dwayne hugged Mike. The embrace was firm, like a weightlifter's grip, but there was no pomp, only quiet gratitude. "This isn't a gift, brother," he whispered so only Mike could hear. "It's a debt." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras clicked, children cheered, but for Mike, it all faded when he saw the boy at the entrance. The same teenager who had once stolen a dumbbell now stood frozen before a new back machine. His fingers trembled as he touched the handle. "Give it a try," Mike said, not recognizing his own voice. The boy looked at him, then yanked the cable. The machine hummed. The display lit up blue. Tears streamed down the boy's cheeks, mixing with sweat. He didn't say they were tears. Everyone understood. Dwayne stepped back into the shadows, watching as the town came to life. Workers began unloading equipment. Locals helped, laughing at their clumsy movements. He noticed Mrs. Clark cautiously sitting on a new elliptical, Farmer Tom pedaling a stationary bike, hunched under his own weight, and Teacher Linda reading the treadmill instructions like poetry. In a corner, among the boxes, he found what he was looking for: children's gloves. Pink and blue, just like the ones gathering dust on the shelf. He hung them next to the old ones, creating a bridge between eras. Then he took out the note Mike kept in his wallet and wrote on the back. Now it's their turn. By noon, the gym was transformed. New machines stood alongside old ones, like veterans taking new recruits under their wing. Mike didn't allow the rusty dumbbells to be removed. They now hung on the wall as art pieces, under a sign that read "Our Roots." Dwayne, meanwhile, discreetly pinned an envelope to the mirror. Inside were funds to settle the debt and a photo of his mother in front of Stronghold Gym. As the crowd began to disperse, Mike approached Dwayne, pointing to the new punching bag. "Want to give it a try?" he asked, holding out the gloves. Dwayne smiled for the first time that day. His punches on the bag sounded different now. Light, almost weightless. Mike understood this wasn't training. It was gratitude. Before leaving, Dwayne placed a box on the counter. "Don't open it until we're gone," he said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Mike waited until the trucks disappeared around the corner. Inside the box were keys to the gym, new, shiny ones and old, rusty ones. And a note: strong people don't replace locks. They open doors. That evening, Mike sat on the floor amidst the shine and memories. He picked up the kettlebell his father had cast and placed it next to its chromed counterpart. Their shadows merged into one, huge, unyielding. Outside, someone had left a box of protein bars and a pair of new gloves by the door. The town whispered about seeing a black SUV, but Mike didn't check. He knew some stories were better left untold. And on the wall, under the veterans' photos, hung another frame with the uncashed $500 check. The inscription read, "For the next mice." A year later, snow fell differently in Springvale. Softer, as if the sky had finally stopped raining ashes on the town. The sign, "The People's Rock Gym," adorned the facade, its letters, steel, cast from the melted dumbbells of Mike's father's era. But the old Iron Haven sign wasn't discarded. It hung inside, above the registration desk, as a reminder that even rust could be a foundation. Mike entered the gym, shaking snowflakes off his jacket. The morning began with rituals. He ran his hand over the wall where the old keys hung, nailed next to the new ones. Then he approached the veterans' photos. Now, next to them, hung a photo from the day the trucks brought the equipment. In the photo, Dwayne stood in profile, his shadow merging with Mike's silhouette, as if they were two parts of a whole. The gym buzzed like a beehive. Veterans with prosthetics worked out on adapted machines, their laughter echoing louder than the clanking of weights. Teenagers from the shelter, now regulars, competed in bench press under the supervision of the same guy who had once stolen a dumbbell. He now worked there, his iron or die tattoo neighboring a new scar, a memento from a street fight he had stopped. Mike approached the window where Dwayne's note hung. "Now it's your turn." Outside, children were building a snowman in a miniature bandana, an exact replica of the one that once adorned a teddy bear. He smiled, remembering how they found that bear in a box of donations for the shelter. Now it sat on the counter, next to a pot of snowdrops that bloomed even in winter. In a corner of the gym, where a broken elliptical once stood, there was now a gratitude wall. A sign read, "Wall of Gratitude." Anyone could leave a note about what they were thankful for. There were children's scrawls. "Thanks for Dad quitting drinking," veterans wrote. "Thanks for feeling my legs again." And someone drew a funny stick figure with a caption, "Thanks for the muscles. Linda finally agreed to a date." But at the center of the wall hung Dwayne's note. "Strong people don't replace locks. They open doors, laminated, protected from time." That evening, when the gym emptied, Mike stayed to fix a stationary bike. The heart rate monitor was broken, a minor issue after a summer of repairing massive problems. He was reaching for a tool when he noticed a box by the door. Black, unmarked, tied with twine. Inside were new sensors, a pack of protein bars, and a photograph. The photo showed Dwayne standing at the gym entrance at night, his hand touching the Iron Haven sign. On the back, "Doors are open. DG." Mike hung the photo on the wall, next to the $500 check. He never found out how Dwayne entered the gym at night, but he found traces, a flip calendar with a marked visit date for veterans, fresh flowers by his father's photo, new gloves for the kids. It became their silent ritual, a dialogue without words, like punches on a boxing bag. That night, the snow stopped. Mike stepped outside, breathing in the sharp air that smelled like iron. In the parking lot stood a black SUV with tinted windows. He didn't approach, just raised his hand in greeting. The headlights flashed twice, then the car disappeared into the darkness, leaving tracks that would be covered by fresh snow by morning. The next morning, a new frame appeared in the gym. It held Dwayne's old cap, the one that had hidden his face during his first visit. Attached to it was a note. Now it's yours. Break someone's heart. Mike smirked, hanging the cap next to the keys. That same day, a kid from the shelter tried it on, the one who had been afraid to lift even an empty barbell. Now he trained in it every day, as if the cap gave him the strength of an invisible giant. By spring, the People's Rock had become more than just a gym. It hosted Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, dance classes for seniors, health lectures by a former doctor-turned-addict whom Mike had found sleeping by the door. Every Sunday, veterans cooked barbecue on an old grill donated by an anonymous benefactor. The meat smelled of smoke and freedom. One day, while sorting donations, Mike found a box of children's books. At the bottom lay an envelope with money and a photo of an unfamiliar woman. On the back was written, "You helped my son. Now it's my turn." He hung the photo on the gratitude wall, even without knowing her name. A week later, someone donated a wheelchair-accessible machine. That summer, Dwayne returned, not as a secret benefactor, but as a guest. He entered without his cap, recognized immediately, but no one rushed for autographs. Veterans nodded, teenagers tipped their caps, children handed him homemade medals from foil. He led a workout, laughing at the creaking of the old barbell Mike kept for atmosphere. Before leaving, he placed a stone on the counter, an ordinary one from the river near his childhood home. Carved into it was, "Even a rock needs a stream." By fall, the stream had become a river. The gym story made it into newspapers, then TV reports. Journalists, bloggers, and curious visitors came. Mike declined interviews, pointing to the gratitude wall. These are the names that matter. But one morning, he found an envelope by the door. Inside was a letter from the mother of the boy who had once stolen the dumbbell. "You saved him. Now he's studying to be a social worker." Mike hung the letter next to Dwayne's photo. 2 years later, on a snowy winter day, Mike was closing the gym. The snow fell as it had the day the trucks arrived. He was turning off the lights when he noticed a figure at the door, a girl of about 12, shivering in a thin jacket. "Can I work out?" she whispered, pointing to the pink gloves. Mike opened the door wide. The girl hit the punching bag, her fist sinking into the fabric. The sound was muffled, uncertain. Mike adjusted her stance, as he had once done for Dwayne. After the workout, she pulled out a crumpled dollar from her pocket. "Keep it," Mike said, "but if you want to repay, help someone when you can." As she left, the girl placed a drawing on the counter. The gym surrounded by people holding hands. The caption read, "Our home." Mike hung it next to Dwayne's stone. At midnight, when the snow-covered streets fell silent, the black SUV stopped again at the People's Rock. Dwayne stepped out, leaving a box of new gloves and a psychology book by the door. A bookmark inside read, "For her." He drove away, unaware that the girl was the daughter of the teenager who had stolen the dumbbell. The story continued, like a river absorbing the streams of destinies. And the gym stood as a beacon, where rust and shine, tears and laughter intertwined. Proof that even in a world of iron, the strongest force was always human.